Hello viewers, welcome. We're going to be talking about the whole Google versus deaf phenomenon in the media. I've got Karl Hale, who is one of the directors of the Mormon Transhumanist Association and is also the treasurer, who's also been keeping an eye on the media responses so far. So this is a part of an interview series I'm doing with a number of transhumanists who have interesting things to say about this. So Karl, I'm just wondering, where did you first hear about this Google versus deaf phenomenon thing in the media?
It was on the internet. It came through.
hmm
It was a bit of a surprise, but then in some respects, not really. Google is they like to push things.
They certainly do. So, just by way of introductions, um, how, can you tell us your background and what got you into transhumanism?
So by training, I am an information systems, so kind of computer and data technology is my field.
hmm
And then, frankly, it was some friends who started talking about the transhumanist concepts, and I am Mormon. I'm an LDS and believe in God, but the Mormon God is sometimes a little different from others. And so as they started talking about transhumanism in the context of Mormon theology, a lot of stuff really kind of started making sense for me in my religious beliefs as well as my scientific beliefs.
Okay, that's cool. So, yeah, it's interesting. If you could imagine a range of responses that, I guess the stereotyped Christian might have, it doesn't seem like a lot of would be like the sort of thing that you or Lincoln might be. Yeah, so you guys might respond very differently to a stereotyped Christian.
I think so for sure.
Mm.
I have to say, growing up, I didn't consider my theology to be very different from most Christian theology. We believe in a Christ. We believe in grace. We believe in redemption. We believe in good works and all of these things that you talk about in the Bible. But at the same time, we also believe in a God who is inside of nature. And although I think even many Mormons wouldn't necessarily use that terminology, it's definitely in our theology that our God is subject to natural law. And so when you start getting something show up that's like the simulation argument, for example,
Mm.
it's kind of just tucks right into what we already have been, thinking as we've learned about these, well, in Lincoln, in fact, helped me to term my belief. One time he challenged me and he said, "Karl, you believe in an extraterrestrial humanoid deity?" And I scratched my head for a second and I said, "Yes, that's exactly what I believe in." And so this kind of a thing works well for me. It does freak out some Christians,
Mm.
even my Mormon friends.
Yeah, I imagine even within the Mormon culture, a lot of the people who aren't really into sort of interpreting for themselves some of the deep doctrine or teachings of some of the early Mormon leaders, who might be a bit freaked out by it. And it's not the sort of thing that's sort of sung from the pulpit at church or taught in like Sunday school or whatnot, is it?
No, not at all. But I have found, as I have plenty of very mainstream Mormon friends who know how I think of God, and as I describe it to them, using terminology that they're comfortable with, using language that they're used to, I find a great deal of at least guarded acceptance, and I've also discovered that I think one of the biggest concerns, and this gets into the topic for this evening, when something comes up like anti-aging or something that is, you get these like shocked or disbelieving responses from someone who is a believer in a god or a supernatural kind of external space. One of the problems is that we kind of talk across each other. And for example, if I talk to one of my friends and I say, "Hey, wouldn't this be awesome if Google pulls this off and we're able to extend our life dramatically?" and they're a believer in God, they're going to immediately start to be guarded. Now, if I have a relationship with them and they know that I'm not just like this absolute nutcase, or they trust me in some way, they'll at least listen. And in that moment, as I see their guarded response, I can say, um, I can reassure them that despite this prolonging of healthy existence, this doesn't in any way, in my view, come counter to or God, I'm not trying to play God. And then we can start having that conversation, because that's really the concern: is how is this contrary to something that they hold deeply, like us not playing God, and then we can start to have healthy, useful conversation.
Hmm. Yeah,
If that
there's a
makes
yeah, it definitely does, and there's a couple of very interesting points which I'd like to riff on a bit. One of them is the whole trust thing. It's been voiced by others, and I share this sort of intuition that a lot of people need somebody who they trust or like see as an authority for maybe even entirely different reasons, for them to come out and say, "Hey, we're researching anti-aging or something like that." In this case, anti-aging, and Google people may trust and respect for a very different reason, because they're a powerful company with lots of money, and they've done great jobs with search engines and G Plus and things like that. Um, Now, they're funding this thing called anti-aging. Before, they may have been on the fence or a little bit hypercritical about it, but maybe it's causing people to think twice and take
that.
and actually take the issue a little bit more seriously, instead of it thinking of it just in the domain of like science fiction or mythology.
That's actually precisely the thing that was most exciting to me about Google's announcement, is that it doesn't really necessarily help me with my religious crowd, but it definitely helps me with my, the crowd that doesn't really care much about the religious aspects, but this is all sci-fi, right? But now Google's on board, and suddenly, wait a second, if they're taking it seriously, if they're throwing money at it, it starts to lend credence.
Yeah, that's interesting. Um, did you get that sort of impression when you were talking to your Mormon friends?
The biggest response from Mormon people about anti-aging is this problem of, but aren't we playing God? And it's frankly fairly easy to talk through that one. I mean, frankly, and I don't necessarily buy this interpretation of the Bible, but there are plenty of Christians out there that believe that we used to live to 1,000 years
I
old,
was going to bring
and
that up,
so.
Methuselah, right?
Exactly. So something like this really is just, what, hey, we're getting back to our roots that God gave us. And even though like I said, I don't necessarily buy that. I think that biblical interpretation is a lot more flexible than that. But I do think that you can use someone's, belief system and help guide them through it. I have maybe another example that might be a little clearer, but it's not. It's on evolution, for example. I totally buy evolution. I mean, evolution is pretty cut and dried as far as I'm concerned. But a lot of my religious friends, including plenty of Mormons, don't. That it freaks them out. And the response whenever someone asks me, "Do you believe in evolution?" If they're a religious person, I say, "I believe in my God and I believe in a creator." And then I talk about evolution. I talk about how that fits in with me in my concept of God, and how evolution, in fact, for me, makes God into a much more beautiful and personable, being. But see, what I do is make sure that that trust that I have with them sticks, and so they don't have a reason to question my faith, which is a critical piece of their trust in me. But that I can then, from there, build on that. We now have this common foundation that we can then build on. And although they might not buy my view on how evolution makes God into this beautiful being, they at least can then accept it and not toss it away as me being antithetical to their religious structure.
Interesting. Yeah. Wow. It also calls into interest some view of the future. Like a lot of people believe that the way to salvation is to die. Um, Now, do you think? I'm not sure what like Lincoln believes, but do you think it's possible that Mormons might be more interested in not dying and achieving salvation through technological means?
So I first of all, we have doctrine, we have theology in our Doctrine and Covenants. We talk about the millennial experience, and there will be this period of definitely heightened, and it's heightened life experience for sure. It's longevity. It's healthier experience. Now, for sure, most Mormons interpret that as being, a God-given grace that is handed to us. I don't think we have to buy it that way, but most Mormons for sure would take it that way. I think the Mormon Transhumanist Association clearly sees that as easily interpreted as a technological advancement. And if you take the Mormon doctrine that or the Mormon teaching that all scientific endeavor, all scientific discovery is in fact revelation from God, then any of this kind of everything that Google's trying to do and everything that everybody else has been trying to do to increase life and to improve health is in fact grace. It's in fact of God. But in this Mormon theology of the millennium, we talk about a group of people who will grow, and it's, when I say a group, it's not like this special group. It's just the people that end up in this situation where they experience the millennial reign, and they've grown now to an age, and in the Doctrine and Covenants, which is one of our bodies of Scripture, it talks about them growing to the age of a tree, which is wide open to interpretation, but sounds pretty old to me. Mm-hmm. And then at that point, they will be changed in the twinkling of an eye. And they won't, in fact, experience death as we know it, but they will then be moved on to the next state. And so this, for a Mormon, then gives us an opportunity to think about a transition that doesn't involve death, and could very comfortably fit into an extremely prolonged life that then we get uploaded into another base. Something along those lines.
Yeah. People may be not familiar with the word upload, and that's open to interpretation, but I guess the concept is like transfer. Really, yeah. Transfer of like patterns into another substrate. For instance, at the moment, like we're thinking beings inside like a corporeal body that is evolved to do what it does, but it's not the most resilient. It's not the most safe, and it's certainly not going to last all that long. I mean, unless we intervene. So, but the idea that you brought up before of actually transferring the personhood, is that correct, into something completely different? Is that what you mean? Like, other than like discarding the body, even its upgraded form, after technological interventions and prostheses and this, that, and the other, there will be something completely different that we're moved onto a completely different substrate.
So, and this is where I should be clear on. I think if you were to talk to most Mormon transhumanists, most members of our organization, I think the majority of them would say it's up for debate. We probably will continue on with the evolutionary technological advancement, and our bodies will just continue to grow with us, and who knows where that path will take. But they would probably not be as quick to say we're gonna stop here and now jump off into another substrate. However, and then the Mormon perspective, the kind of mainstream Mormon perspective, they would not use these terms, but that's precisely what the Mormon theology is. We believe in the resurrection. And the resurrection, though, for us is that our bodies, and there is definitely this idea that the human body is brought forward out of the ground, and we talk about the graves bursting open, etc. It starts to become kind of a gruesome experience if you aren't too careful. But we talk about this, but then here's the key, and this is why I think this idea of a modified or a different substrate is tucks into Mormon theology, and that is that this resurrected being is in fact very different. We talk about specifically there is no blood in the body. It has something else. We call it spirit. Who knows what it is? It's nanobots. I don't know what it is. You don't have the same frailties that you have on this planet. This sounds to me like a very different substrate. Fine. Is it a super enhanced Homo sapien? Who knows? I frankly don't care too much as far as the theology is concerned. I also don't care too much, and I kind of sit in between these two spaces that I just described, the Mormon transhumanists and the mainstream Mormon. I do tend to think of God as really a post-human, and what he's done, he's got access to some incredibly sophisticated technology. I do think that he's shown that it's in his best interest to help us get to that space where he's arrived at already, kind of on our own. There's something important about this discovery process ourselves, as opposed to him just handing it to us. But I kind of tend to lean toward this thought that at some point he's going to say, "Okay, guys, good job. You've beaten yourselves up enough now. Here," and I'm kind of let's step up.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So that's kind of where I end up leaning.
Sure. Now it's interesting. It's that the Mormon Transhumanist Association have these sorts of interpretations. Do you predict if, as the advance of technology gets more and more obvious, I'm talking about radical sorts of technologies that will affect human beings, allow people to live longer, enhance perception, and enhance resistances to diseases, add intelligence and strength. Will the general Mormon Church be a little bit more leaning towards what the Mormon Transhumanist Association might be today? In the future, that is, of course.
Well, the Mormon Church and the organizational structure and the hierarchy of the Mormon Church is extremely conservative,
Mm-hmm.
and very careful and slow to shift with culture. And I think that's been one of the reasons why they've been able to preserve a unified body. We're one of the only churches that has still had a unified theology across all of our congregations, and I think one of the reasons we're able to preserve that is because of this very careful approach to things. So with that said, yes, I do think another doctrine in the Mormon Church that I firmly believe in, and that is probably foundational to every other belief that I have, is that all truth is one whole. There is no need to separate religious thought from scientific thought. If there is a division, if there's a conflict between religious thought and scientific thought, it's because one or the other is mistaken. One or the other is not fully evolved. One or the other doesn't have all the pieces. But that at some point we will see those things connect. For me, this has been the case with evolution, for example. This is the case for every kind of advancement that we have. There are right now zero problems with prostheses in the Mormon Church. No doctrinal problems at all. There are zero problems with the enhancements that we have now, like LASIK technology. There are zero theological problems with that. And so I think as we start to experience dramatic life extension, which I definitely see coming from a technological perspective, I think the Mormon Church will embrace it. What is never going to change for the Mormon Church and for me is a gratitude and an appreciation for this intensely complex thing that is the universe, and that space is that we're the first to try to be pulling off this trajectory is just unfathomable by me. I just think, statistically speaking, that's just, in my view, ludicrous to think that, well, it's terribly egotistical, at least, to think that I'm the first, that we're the first on this trajectory. And I think what that means from a theological perspective is that there's always going to be a place for God. Are we going to meet him? Is he going to be sitting there as we, as we explore the universe, as we produce these 1,000, 10,000 year long lifespans? I don't know if we're going to discover him or if he's going to come and shake our hands, but I think that will be the perception of the Mormon Church as it and technology continues to evolve.
It's interesting. Now at the moment, like the Mormons have a president and like a quorum of leaders, 12 leaders.
Hmm.
Now, who's the president at the moment?
Thomas S. Monson.
Okay, right. Now, what would happen if, like, we have advanced technology to extend life? Would that mean that we'd have just one president of the Mormon Church for a very, very long period of time? Because usually,
As
what happens is like people like they die and then somebody else takes over, right?
That's correct. That's exactly right. The president is in there until death for sure. That's a great question. I had not even thought of that. I do think that the the most Mormons like to think of our traditions as being very kind of cast in stone, but our history shows that that's not necessarily the case. We do currently, and we always have. Ooh, I don't even know my own church history enough to say that confidently, but I'm pretty sure we have always found that the successor to the deceased prophet is the member of the quorum of the 12 apostles who has been in the quorum of the 12 the longest. So this is something that has always happened. The oldest, well, the longest serving apostle becomes the new prophet. Most people think that that's the doctrine that has to be. That's actually not the case. It's whoever God selects. Usually, this is through the quorum of the 12 apostles working together, figuring out who they think is the next person in line. They come to consensus, and then that person is it. Now, that person is always the one with the most seniority. It doesn't have to be that way. So, similarly, does the prophet have to be there until he dies? Great question. I don't see a need necessarily. I think that would be a fantastically interesting situation to be in.
Yeah, yeah, right. So, well,
We do have, if I can say
mhm.
this, we do have a lot of experience with. So there's the president, and then he has two counselors, and they form the first presidency. And in our doctrine, that it's the first presidency together that have the total keys. Um, they have equal authority to the quorum of the 12, but it's the first presidency together, and there is kind of cycling through on that. Again, it's because of death, but it's if a counselor dies, then they bring in a new counselor. So there's always this kind of cycling experience. I could see there's obviously value in that cycling, and if people aren't dying anymore, then I can see that change.
That's interesting. Um, so, the Mormon Church has had a few spin-offs in the past. One of them's the reorganized Mormon Church. I think we brought that up with Lincoln. Now, it it's a bit like the types of technologies on the horizon could actually radically change what cultures sort of view on what it means to be human is, or challenge that view. Um, do you think there will be varying sort of ideas and maybe schisms or varying attitudes towards the use of scientifically enabled or the technology or advanced technologies to augment the human? Will there be many disagreements? Do you think that could result in some form of church schism in the future?
Sure, anything's possible. I, I, there's obviously been some of that in the past. Some pretty significant, schisms. The most significant was almost the first, the one when Joseph Smith, the founder, died, and they were trying to figure out who was next in line. Um, and since then, there have obviously been other schisms, but they have been fairly minor from a population, count. Uh, when we had a dramatic shift, most recently, probably the most dramatic recent shift was when we um, uh, opened the priesthood to all men, whereas in 1978, until that point, African American people of African descent specifically couldn't have it. That was a pretty freaky thing for a lot of dyed in the wool traditional Mormons, and there were people who left the church because of that. Um, Now, obviously, the main body of the church stayed with that, and to my knowledge, and I'm not a historian, but to my knowledge, there wasn't actually a splinter group that became the, Mormons against blacks group. I'm not aware of any.
I
Um,
haven't heard of
so
that one either. But
so so I do think that if, for example, we suddenly, well, honestly, I can't even think of some of the technologies that would dramatically change us from human to where we start to become something closer to post-human. That would freak out Mormons. I can see people individually leaving the church. I could see large groups of people leaving, but I can't see a splinter organization based on that. Not one of any significance. I think the biggest question would be something around the gender. If there starts to be modification of introducing a third gender, for example, this could become fairly problematic. And um, I don't know what could happen with that, but I'd be curious to see from there something like that. I think that the main body of the church would probably stick with the traditional approach for a very, very, very long time. Uh, and so if there were a splinter, it would be someone trying to embrace technology that the body of the church is not ready to embrace, and they might splinter off. Something like that I could see, I guess.
that's interesting. So, I mean, it seems like the Mormon transhuman organization are very techno-progressive, very interested in the way that technologies evolve, but also more willing than the average, even non-Christian, non-religious person for the uptake of such technologies. Have you ever convinced anybody to become a Mormon, or have you ever heard of anybody convincing someone to become a Mormon with the sort of argument we've been talking today about how to interpret the doctrine through a transhumanist lens?
So I have not personally, but I do know of. I have not personally talked to someone and convinced them to become a Mormon because of this, but I do know that we have had a couple. We have had some, as we call them, converts through the Mormon Transhumanist Association. And I apologize. I'm sorry, Lincoln couldn't talk with you, but he would be.
Yes.
He's got a couple of really good stories on that one. So you ought to,
Oh,
in the
wow.
future, you ask him about those.
Yeah.
However, I will say that I have had some very healthy discussions, and for me, exciting discussions for people who have started to lose their faith, who are Mormon, who were born Mormon perhaps, but had started to have a difficult time reconciling logic, maybe to some degree technology, with theology. And as I have talked about things in context such as worshiping an extraterrestrial humanoid deity, then that starts to make the conversation be broad enough that they were able to start to reconsider their faith. We do have one member of the board of the Mormon Transhumanist Association, Don Bradley, who was born Mormon, was raised Mormon, is an excellent historian, and through some of his experience, not from a technology perspective, but from a logic and history of the church, decided to leave the church, the Mormon Church, and then it was largely due to, and I don't know that Lincoln would characterize it this way, but it's largely due to Lincoln's efforts in his discussions around these concepts, this idea of how we can view God and science in the same conversation, that now has brought Don Bradley back into the Mormon Church, and he's an active, faithful, believing member of the Mormon Church.
Wow, that's interesting. So, wow. So, do you think there's many other faiths out there which are more conducive towards accepting technological change, and even like the change of the human, transhumanism? Do you think? Yeah, I haven't seen much sort of Christian response to transhumanism at all. The Mormons is pretty much it, but that's not to say that Christians wouldn't be if they knew about it. I'm
No,
just
I don't
wondering
think so.
why is it that just the Mormons are taking an active stance in transhumanism?
Well, we do have actually a member of the MTA who is not a Mormon. He's an active Christian. He's active in his faith,
Sure.
And he views the kind of, well, I'll just say it in brief, the grace inside of transhumanism. And so from a religious perspective, it works really well for him. Now, I think the reason you're seeing this, and to answer your question, I don't know of any. I'm not a theological scholar either, a scholar of religions either, but I'm not aware of any other religions that really snug in nicely into transhumanism, or transhumanism snugs in nicely to them. And it's because of one thing. I think that the main reason is because we do not believe in the supernatural. We do not believe, none of our doctrine, none of our theology requires something to happen outside of nature. All of the miracles of Jesus, and I believe that the miracles of Jesus very likely happened. My faith does not depend on them happening, but my faith totally allows for them to have happened. All of the miracles of Jesus, if Moses parted the Red Sea, then he did it through non-supernatural means. It happened through something that we will someday understand, and it'll make sense on a scientific level. So when I talk about God, and I think of him inside of nature, he is subject to natural law. Now, this freaks out a lot of Christians. It freaks out a lot of Mormons, but it's our doctrine. This is inside of our scriptures. It's very easy to discuss with Mormons about the idea of God being inside of and subject to nature. It starts to become painful for people in terms of these ideas that are cherished by all sorts of theological groups, not just Christians. An all-powerful being, an all-knowing being, an omnipresent being. These are difficult and painful because it kind of pulls the rug out from underneath them. Wait, but I've been relying my entire life on this infallible being, and so the minute you stick him inside of nature, they have to start to shift this, and it's very painful. And Mormon theology, Joseph Smith from the beginning founded the doctrine on top of the idea that God is inside of and subject to natural law. One of our scriptures in the Doctrine and Covenants says, "I, the Lord, am bound when you do what I say." This idea of binding God is blasphemous for most Christians, but we believe that God is bindable when we do what He says, when we follow as I view it, the natural laws of the universe that He has been teaching us. That no, there's nothing mystical about love. It just makes freaking sense. You've got to love people, or we're going to kill each other. There's nothing. As we follow the natural laws of the universe, which are God's commandments, we will become like God, and God will be with us and one with us.
That's interesting. So, but you also believe that God has gods.
Yes.
And God has gods who have gods.
Infinite regression of gods.
Wow,
yes.
wow, that's interesting. To the beginning of time, is that what the interpretation, or is this universe sort of the boundary?
So that's wide open for interpretation. Okay, so the doctrine is what the early brethren talked about, an infinite regression of gods. So turtles all the way down, as we like to say it. And we meaning transhumanists, Mormon transhumanists, not necessarily Mormons. But yes, that's the doctrine. Now, how that can be interpreted is wide open. Do I believe in the Big Bang? Well, all the evidence seems to point that direction, so sure, no problem. What does this mean for the idea of an infinite regression of gods? Well, I think there are a couple of different ways we can put this together. Is there a God of this universe? Maybe. Sure, let's go with that one for a second. If there's a God of this universe, then it makes logical sense that perhaps the Big Bang was the beginning of his domain. When he graduated from God school, from whatever position he was at before he's at where he is right now, when he graduated from that point, he was given his universe packet. And by no means does this, I don't want this to sound like I think he orchestrated the entire thing. I actually think that he probably, well, not probably, he always follows natural law. I think when I talk about God in the evolution and God in the Big Bang, I actually am not talking about, and I don't believe in what is commonly understood by intelligent design. I don't think that makes sense. But I do see him as being a mediator, a guide, a place with a sand. He's got a sandbox, and he allows the tides to come in and form things. But it's kind of his space. It's his kingdom. So whether the universe as we know it, initiated by the Big Bang, is his domain, or whether this galaxy is his domain, and every single the Andromeda galaxy has its own God. I don't know, and Mormon doctrine doesn't require those definitions to be made. The doctrine is that there never was a beginning, there will never be an end. There are gods all the way back, and there will be gods all the way into the future. How you want to tuck that into our evolving understanding of the universe, fine. I mean, the multiverse blows that open. String theory with 11 dimensions. I mean, who knows where God's domain is? But yes, does God have a God? He does. What's he doing right now? Haven't the foggiest idea. I can't even fathom precisely what my God's doing. What his God's doing, outside my domain.
Interesting. So, when were you first introduced to transhumanism, and what was it that? I mean, you must have been were you born into the church?
Yes, I was born Mormon.
So you were Mormon before you were transhumanist. So it seems. Yeah, I mean, what first introduced you to this idea, this whole transhumanist idea, and what was a freaky thing or whatever it was in Mormonism that really hooked you, that got your attention and made you want to know more and more, and what got you excited?
So it has to be this idea of all truth being one, and as I learned, I mean, I'll be frank. When I was younger, when I was 18, 19, 20, no, evolution was evil.
Right.
No, I was a very traditional Christian. I had, I think, a non-traditional Mormon for a father. I had a very traditional Mormon for a mother. They were fine, but I kind of got the different things kind of inside me as I was growing up. But as I was becoming an adult, I was a very what you would consider, what most Christians would consider to be a very traditional Christian. I didn't question the problems of the logical problems of omnipotence, for example. I didn't question the conflicts between science and religion. I didn't question them. It was just I believed, and I had my faith, and this was it. As I start having introduction to various concepts, I'm going to say probably evolution may be one of the things that started me kind of into this space. It's not a transhumanist, but it is. Evolution is totally a transhumanist concept. As we talk about the technology of geology, the technology of biology, these are transhumanist concepts pre the digital age, right? But they're still transhumanist concepts. I would say that as I started to try to reconcile things like evolution into my religious upbringing, I started to realize the expansive nature of Mormon doctrine, and I started to think, wow, this can fit. There can be multiple views. And so then, to answer your question specifically, when I have my friend, again, someone who I have a trust relationship with, who's a Mormon, say, hey, there's this interesting conversation that's going on about this transhumanist concept. I'm like, what's transhumanism? It's this idea that we're evolving through technology. Whoa, that's weird. What does that mean? Yeah, but don't you see? It actually makes sense with the idea of a perfected body, which is a Mormon doctrine. This idea of a resurrected, perfected body, it fits through technology. That's kind of weird. Yeah, but we're already doing fake hearts, and we're already doing fake legs. I mean, why not? And start thinking, okay, why not? And so it opened my mind to this possibility. And then everything fits. Everything fits for me in my Mormon theology and transhumanist concepts. Now, sure, there's spaces. Okay, where's the role of grace? I don't know quite yet. I've got some ideas around it. Do we really understand what it means to be resurrected? I don't know, but can it fit both in the transhumanist world and the Mormon world? Totally, it can fit. So as I see now a structure for every bit of knowledge that is important to me fit together and with zero conflict and even with insight. For example, the simulation argument. Simulation argument. Really
I've got a really good interview with Nick Bostrom on that one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yes.
So it talks nicely to this idea of an infinite regression of gods, right? I mean, this idea that here's our universe, and oh, by the way, it's probably a simulated universe inside of another universe, which is probably a simulated universe inside of okay, this is the Mormon doctrine of infinite regression of gods. So not only do all of my beliefs fit together, theological, religious, and scientific, they fit together, thanks to transhumanism, but they also start to expand each other. They also start to grow with each other. Sorry, that was a long answer to your question.
That's a really good answer. Then do you believe that people will be able to achieve grace or achieve what's it called? Salvation through technological means without going through specific ordinances and procedures that are part of the Mormon doctrine?
It's a great question. And yes, I do believe that. But yes, I believe they will actually perform the necessary steps to satisfy God. And the reason I believe that, I haven't figured this all out yet. Once I figure it out, I'll let you know.
Okay.
But, the reason I believe that is because, going back to something I said a minute ago, I do not believe God gave 10 random commandments. I don't believe that Jesus listed off a set of things that he just thought would be cool for everyone to do. I believe what they were doing was describing success, long-term success in the universe. When Jesus says there's only one commandment, love thy neighbor and love God. He's not saying God really wants you to worship him and like lick his feet. No, that's not what he's talking about. He's not saying, you know what, you need to like always turn the other cheek and give everything you have to your neighbor. That's not what love's about. Love is about a mutual respect. And when he says love God, think about this for a second. This also sounds very blasphemous to a traditional Christian, but to me it is salvation. When he says love God, he's talking about a mutual respect between us and God. And how can we respect God and how can God respect us if we don't try to become like him? That's the goal, is to become like him. And I frankly believe through transhumanist ideas and theories that a person who has at his soul, at his heart, at his core, the desire for dominance, for oppression, for violence, for revenge, I don't believe that that person is going to succeed in the long run in this universe. I think that person will be adjusted or annihilated.
Attitude adjustment therapy, yes, or annihilate.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
They don't fit in the long-term success model of the universe. I do think that when Jesus says love thy neighbor, he's just telling us how the universe works. And as we learn to love each other, as we learn to develop this mutual respect and this desire for the betterment of each other together, this is what will allow us to survive transhumanism. I mean, when you get your, laser beam guided missile launching eyeball embedded in your brain, and you have the ability to destroy your neighbor with a thought through a transhumanist, technologically evolutionary process. When you get that ability, if you haven't also developed the ability to love your neighbor, you wake up on the wrong side of the bed and your neighbor's toast. You don't have the you don't have the moral fortitude to not annihilate your neighbor. And same goes with your neighbor. So if we're talking about this incredible advancement in our physiological capabilities, my view is that it has to coincide with these teachings that a lot of people have thought of as religious teachings, but they're all over this place, right? I mean, I don't need to tell you that we need to be nice to each other. That just like makes sense, right? It's not like the religious teachings. That's what Jesus is talking about. That's what God needs. So are you going to need to be baptized in the Mormon church in order to receive your, dramatic life extension and your upload into your, next substrate? If you need it, you'll want it. If you don't need it, you don't need it. But you will end up becoming like God, which doesn't just include the ability to annihilate the next universe over. It also includes the ability to not annihilate the next universe over.
That's interesting. So there needs to be some sort of like a regulation on how we use our transhuman technologies from a, I interpret from an agnostic point of view. Then, without the religious undertones or religious teachings, we just need to be good people and make good use of technology so as a population of transhumanists we survive, rather than survival of the fittest, or
That's exactly
dominance,
right.
or the reduction to whichever one does the most damage in the end.
Yeah.
Okay.
I sincerely believe that if we don't do this, that there's only one other option, and that is complete annihilation. I mean, we might annihilate ourselves back to the trees and be hanging by our tails for a little while, and then we'll evolve back up, and if we don't learn it again, then we'll annihilate each other again back down to some rudimentary life. I don't, and you said regulation. I do not believe that you can legislate righteousness. I think anytime somebody tries to legislate, love thy neighbor, doesn't work. It has to come from, internal desire. You start running into problems about, well, I thought I was loving my neighbor, and my neighbor thought he was loving me, but we totally disagree with each other because he's a Republican and I'm a Democrat. Those problems will continue to be, but as we continue to evolve, as we continue to have more access to better data, which is a critical piece of transhumanism, I think we will start to have better conversations. We'll start to have better, win-win situations, better, third alternatives that, you and I both had one option and we work together and discover this third better option. These will start to happen naturally. I don't believe that it's possible to legislate righteousness.
Interesting. So David Pearce, who you might be aware of, has the idea of a hedonistic imperative, so as to, I guess, breed or engineer, whether it be technologically or pharmaceutically, states of well-being, and phase out suffering, so that motivation isn't guided by a pleasure-pain axis. It's just guided by gradients of bliss, or hedonic set points. What do you think of that idea? If someone could give you a pill so that you would be more righteous, more loving, would you take it?
I don't think so. And the reason is because I think this gets back a little bit to something I said early on. There seems to be something important about our own self-discovery and our own painful, difficult progress toward becoming this incredibly powerful being that transhumanism and Mormonism both describe. There seems to be something important about that. I don't know what it is, but I do think it has something to do with what happens if you develop this pill and you stick me off in my domain in the universe, and I'm now head governor of the Andromeda Galaxy, and I've got the pill, but something goes haywire. Solar flares that we didn't test out hits it, and suddenly I'm back to, or I have a flare up of my my natural instinct. I think it's safer if we develop, I won't even say it that way. I think if it were possible to develop a pill to create a perfect governor of the Andromeda Galaxy, it would have been done. We would already experience that, but that's not what we're experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
And I have experience. I've got a family. I've got kids. I learn as I go. I yell at my kids and I spank my kids and I feel bad and I'm sorry, and I learn, and okay, next time I don't spank my kids, and I start to develop this experience. Now, is my kid's backside sore because of what I've done? Yes. Was that a bad thing? Yes, that was a bad thing. Are he and I both able to grow from that experience? Yes. Where I start to become really, where I said I don't think I would take the pill, is that the horrors that we managed to lay out on each other on this planet are way worse than spankings. They're way worse than yellings. We do these horrific things to each other across the planet, and it becomes an extremely painful question. If I could solve,
It comes down to the problem of evil.
it's exactly what the problem is. And so if I could trust that there were some mechanism that could cause me to be a perfect governor of the Andromeda Galaxy, leave me all to myself, no guidance, no supervision, and I will never make another mistake. If there were some mechanism that could do that in this theoretical structure, yeah, I'd do it. I just don't buy that any mechanism that could do that would be any faster than the one I've got going for me right now, which is, okay, Karl, start out being a dad, then work further up and become eventually.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. I mean, like, if there were a bunch of people, if there was a technology to enable that, and this is the thought experiment, and the people wanting to learn through, I guess, rubbing up against evil, they'd probably progress in righteousness a lot slower than the person who was just willing to take that pill. If it was guaranteed to make them righteous and nice. So, in a sense, it wouldn't be, if all the religious people didn't take the pill because they wanted to learn the hard way, then they'd be the bad guys. And everybody else took the good pill. The religious people would end up being the bad guys, right? You don't want to end up being in that place, right?
I totally agree. In this thought experiment, you're exactly right. In the thought experiment, I would take the pill in a heartbeat. If this pill were guaranteed, I would take the pill in a heartbeat. There's, in fact, I think, a moral imperative to do that. I think, unfortunately, the pill is extremely complex, and it's one we've been taking. That's my view on it. If we come up with one that's guaranteed, amen, let's do it.
Well, it may be the case that we can sort of regulate some of the chemistry in the brain so as to increase the likelihood of feeling like doing good things, and that's probably near term. Often people, when they do nasty things, sometimes it may come down to brain chemistry, rather than the actual direction, their own consciousness. If you can separate those two things, so yeah, there's some relevance to the idea of thinking about this thought experiment now, because we may be able to do things like that in the near future. The other thing is, as far as I understand, if God was going to let people into heaven with an inkling of possibility that they could actually do bad things like Satan did or whatever, and divide heaven or something like that, then would he do that? Would he? I mean, wouldn't like we immunize ourselves against diseases, try and immunize ourselves? Wouldn't God be in favor of immunization against certain horrors, like certain actions or certain evil deeds?
So that's where I differ from definitely Christianity at large, and I think Mormonism. I think mainstream Mormonism probably would say what you just described. Once you get into heaven, you're not going to make any mistakes anymore. Um, I actually don't believe that that's possible. I don't think it's possible. Perfection is not perfection as defined in our Western approach is not a reality.
Yeah, I
So
get that. So if even if the pills won't be perfect, but could
well,
guarantee an increase in the percentage likelihood that you will be doing the right things instead of the wrong things, then that could be worth taking if you're interested in being more increasing the likelihood that you'll end up doing the right things.
we do it right now. In fact, I have that in my own family,
Mm.
and it's called depression. You have depression, and if you clinical depression, you are eligible to take drugs
Mm-hmm.
that will even you out, that will take you out of these highs and lows, and these lows drop you into a space which, in Mormon doctrine as well as other Christian doctrine, suicide is not a good thing. That's a sin.
Mm.
And so we do it now already. We say, you know what? If you're a danger to yourself, if you're in danger of committing sin, in this case, suicide, and it goes even softer than that. When you're a depressed person, you do angry things. You yell and you're rude and you're selfish and these kinds of things. And I'm being very overgeneralizing here, but just for this, the structure of this argument. And right now, Mormon doctrine, and I don't think any other doctrine okay, that's probably not true, but any other doctrine I'm aware of, preaches against taking medication for depression. This is the beginning stages of mental chemical modification for helping people be more righteous, as you described. Now, the problem, though, and I think this is a good example. I have members of my own family, extended family, who some take medication for depression, some don't, and it's an ongoing debate about whether the person on the medication is actually better off. Do they avoid those low points? For sure, they do. They also avoid the high points. Those really manic phases. And so, are they better off? Well, they're not killing themselves, and I'm very grateful for that. So it's an example. In the theoretical space of, could a drug, if there were a drug available that had no ill effect and it really did make you even improve your righteousness, yeah, we should take it. I'll buy it when I see it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, so I guess the need for evil or some form of influence, like satanic influence on the world, may no longer be needed in order to make people more righteous in the future. But maybe that won't be, from a religious point of view, completely phased out ever. But it seems like from a religious and a non-religious perspective, at least your religious perspective or interpretation, it's a good thing to increase people's likelihood of being generally good and feeling generally better. I'm not advocating, taking some of the crude pharmacological options that we have today, but increasing our knowledge in this area, and getting our working fundamentals on neuropsychology and things like that may actually help us develop drugs or pharmaceuticals to improve this. But then also we could use prostheses to be able to help regulate brain patterns and all those sorts of things in the future as technology gets more develops better and is more widely accepted. I think it's a good thing. Yeah.
I agree.
Mm.
I agree. And I don't think it has any theological problem with it.
That's interesting. So anyway, it's been we've covered a lot of ground. Is there anything that you'd like to cover? You normally ask this, and sometimes it's after a long conversation, it's hard to think of something. But have you got anything that you've been thinking of talking about, or would be relevant to this interview?
Well, I appreciate the question, and I feel like I've already kind of talked your ear off.
No, that's been great. It's been really interesting, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do think that the greatest value that can be had with these kinds of conversations is helping people to acknowledge the commonalities. There are so many times when I feel like when I'm talking to non-religious people as well as talking to religious people, that I find myself kind of arguing, kind of devil's advocate, although it's not quite the right term, because what I argue for is what I believe. I just happen to be arguing for the thing that the person I'm talking to doesn't believe. So I find the space where they might need, maybe a little bit of tweaking, and I tend to tweak. But the most valuable conversations are those where a bridge is attempted to be made. And I appreciate the conversation we've had tonight. I think there's been some interesting perspectives shared. I love what I see as the never-ending possibilities of knowledge and where it can come from. When I talked about if science and religion don't meet, it's because we misunderstand one or the other. I mean that sincerely, and I think it could be one or the other. And as we're open to those possibilities, I think that's where we're going to not only develop the technologies to allow us to become what I will consider to be gods, but we will also develop the benevolence to allow ourselves to be those gods.
Excellent. Well said. Well, it's been a fantastic interview. Thanks everybody for listening. And yeah, this will be online shortly. Cheers.